It's not so much time to have a serious talk about first past the post as it is to laugh it off. Much of the developed world has long since moved past it. Nobody's clambering to bring it back. And when Ontario held a cross-party citizens' assembly to test it with trial runs against mixed member proportional representation, 90% of the assembly recommended proportional representation. In the last Ontario election, there were three parties that presented platforms considerably to the left of Doug Ford's Conservatives. They got 58% of the popular vote. First, the Conservatives took total power, then announced they would be reducing Democratic opposition by shrinking Toronto City Council from 47 councillors to 25. When this was declared unconstitutional by the courts, they announced they would ram it through with a notwithstanding clause, and none of this was even mentioned on the campaign trail. Now, this is, to be sure, an extreme of anti-democratic behavior, but the problem which is allowing it has been around for a long time. With the lens of first past the post on, one would think that Canadians had been drifting to the right in recent neoliberal decades. In the mid-20th century, we were shaping up a lot more like a Scandinavian social democracy, partly due to the cross-party influence of Tommy Douglas. But we've since moved away from Denmark and towards the United States of America, with some of our most basic needs neglected along the way. Child poverty has actually gone up over the last 30 years. Student debt went from virtually non-existent to well over $20,000 per average graduate. And affordable housing shortages are now found in small and large cities across the country, even as inequality continues to spiral. But put on the lens of proportional representation, and you'll find that Ontario and Canada voted centre-left in almost every single one of those elections taking place over that time. Sometimes closer to the centre, sometimes further to the left, but centre-left almost without exception. And this shouldn't surprise us. Americans have been pulling way to the left of their economic spectrum for ages. When Bernie Sanders finally ran for president, he almost took the Democratic nomination from out of nowhere, and he continues, as he was in 2016, to pull 12 points ahead of Donald Trump. In Norway, where they have proportional representation, they've been voting centre-left to left for generations, and even their more conservative parties look social democratic or centrist to most of the world. It's time to stop having ridiculous conversations about the legitimacy of unpopular populists with total power shrinking democratic institutions. Let's replace them, and adamantly, with real conversations about things like how Scandinavian countries not only have better electoral systems, but their tax agencies do citizens' taxes for them, and then they send them itemized breakdowns of exactly how their tax dollars are being spent. How citizens are automatically registered to vote, and they have an 80% voter turnout. Let's make our institutions more democratic and more transparent. Most people are quite reasonable. They want democratic participation in the matters that affect their lives, a reasonable distribution of the wealth produced, good compensation for the working class, and a social safety net for the disadvantaged, not the extremes of corporate capitalism. It's time to stop giving misrepresentatives power over the democratic sentiment and start giving the democratic sentiment more powerful representation. Thank you.